Hi there, Steve here. A little bit of an experiment. My microphone, the one that I tucked into my shirt collar there, for whatever reason stopped working. I can't seem to get a microphone to plug into my iPhone, so I'm using my iPad just to see what this is like. Today I want to talk about listening. And I'm going to talk about listening for a couple of reasons. First of all, because I think it is the most powerful active, language learning activity. It's so easy to do, and it has, I think, a major influence on our brain, and it's the one that we need in order to be comfortable in speaking, because we need to understand. And the reason I'm on this subject is a couple of reasons, actually. One, on my Twitter feed, I saw an article about some research in Germany where some people are going to give free German lessons to Syrian immigrants, and they're going to study the effect on their brains. And they're going to look at the effects on these learners' brains of two different approaches to language learning. And I'm going to leave a link, by the way, to this article in the description box. And so the one method of language learning that they're going to look at is what is described in the article as simply exposing the learners to lots of vocabulary up front, and letting them go to it. And the alternative to that is to provide them with some grammar instruction. Personally, I don't see either as being I don't see why they're choosing that as the kinds of learning to compare. I can't imagine learning vocabulary when it's not embedded in some kind of interesting content. Because I think when we are engaging with content of interest, compelling content, as Krashen describes it, it's not just the words that we're picking up. We're connecting with the meaning of something that we're interested in another language. And I'd be interested in seeing the impact of that on people's brains, as opposed to, and it's not as if you wouldn't provide some input on grammar, some overview of how the grammar works in another language, but the opposition to that is this idea of teaching grammar rules and expecting the learner to be able to get it and produce the language correctly in drills and tests and so forth. That is the traditional approach, and I think I'd be interested in seeing how the brain reacts to that as opposed to an input-based method of learning. Now, obviously, to listen, you have to understand. In order to understand, in my view, you have to read, or the quickest way to get there is reading, because just as we do at LingQ, and I have to say this, I think LingQ is just about the most efficient way of acquiring vocabulary through compelling content where you combine audio with text, because you start with easy material, 30 seconds long, and you go to which may not be that compelling, but as quickly as possible you get to more difficult and compelling text where you're able to look up words, you see these words highlighted when they show up again in other texts, you can save phrases, all of this kind of thing, so that then you can go back to listening. And I spend 70% of my learning time on listening, because I can do it in the car, I can do it while washing dishes, as I've said before, I can do it in so many different places. If I have dedicated learning time, I like to read. And when I read, I save words and phrases. But let's look at what listening does for you. First of all, and before I get to that, let's look at how technology has made listening so much easier. First of all, everyone nowadays has a smartphone. You can have MP3 files on there. And what's more, I've now subscribed to apps from Russian websites, Polish websites, Czech websites, Swedish websites, whereby I am regularly fed, or I can go to my sort of bookshelf at these websites and get additional audiobooks or whatever it might be, or if these are newspapers or magazines, I get my monthly or my weekly magazine. I have this constant access to interesting material in the language that didn't exist 10, 20, 30 years ago. That's amazing to me. Not to mention the ease of carrying this little thing, which is also your phone and camera. So it's easier. Technology has made it easier. The other thing about it is, if I listen to something in Polish or Czech or Russian not so much because I understand it, but in Polish, it's a stimulus for me. I see where my gaps are. I see what I'm missing. It drives me to want to go and read. So the listening is not only easier to do, but to the extent, at least the way it works for me, to the extent that there are parts and words there and phrases that I don't understand, it motivates me then to go and read it. And again, at Link, we typically have the text for the audio. So it's a major motivator. The other thing about listening is that it's a good self-testing activity, because you can tell if you can understand or not understand. And maybe you didn't understand 3 months ago or 6 months ago, and you understand today. So that's a way of testing yourself. If you can sense that you're making some progress, which is also motivating. So now another thing with listening I find is that whereas reading is where I sort of nail down the vocabulary because I see it over and over again in different texts and stuff. But the listening is where this vocabulary starts to be converted into words and phrases that I can use. It gives there's a certain rhythm to the language when you hear it, which gives you that momentum, so that you say, I have all these words and phrases now that I want to use. And in fact, when you do go to speak, out of nowhere, I find that these words and phrases simply bubble out if I've listened often enough. So listening, to my mind, is a great preparation for speaking. And of course, the other thing about listening comprehension as a learning activity is that if you have good listening comprehension skills, to me, that is the base for developing other skills. If I'm in a conversation with someone and I understand what they are saying, I feel confident. And even if I stumble a little in expressing myself, I know that I will gradually get better. On the other hand, if I don't understand and I'm forever asking, excuse me, pardon me, what was that? I feel uncomfortable, and that to my mind is a bigger negative than struggling to say something. That's why I always say, get your listening comprehension down and the rest will fall into place. So I just wanted to say, listening as part of sort of compelling content, which isn't to say that you don't review grammar. And nowadays, I can just go, Polish verbs or conjugate this, and I find it all on the internet. So you can regularly review grammar when you feel that you want to, have another look at some rules or some, endings and stuff. But the main learning activity is this exposure to meaningful content, listening and reading. And I would rather, in the case of this German study, see them compare a sort of input-based, compelling, content-based learning approach, how that affects the brain, as compared to a more traditional, grammar-heavy, we taught you this, now we're going to drill you on this, see if you can get it right type of approach. So there you have it. That's what I have to say today, and I'm curious to see how this video turns out done on my iPad. Bye for now.